What if the greatest mistake you ever made wasn't a mistake at all? What if you knew exactly how it would end? The regret, the fallout, the consequences, and still chose it anyway. In Greek mythology, there is a titan whose name means afterthought, a man who did not act without thinking but thought too late. His name was Epimetheus, and his story isn't really about ignorance. It's about something far more uncomfortable: knowing and still choosing wrong. Epimetheus was the Titan god of afterthought, a counter to his brother Prometheus, the Titan god of forethought. We know from the story of Prometheus that both brothers had sided with Zeus during the war. After the war's conclusion, Epimetheus and his brother were given the task of populating the earth with both animals and men. During the creation, Epimetheus was given the task of assigning skills and attributes. True to his nature, he did not plan ahead and gave everything to animals before arriving at man. Speed, strength, protection, nothing was left. When the brothers approached Zeus to seek more attributes, he declined their request and was willing to allow mankind to go unprotected into the world. Epimetheus's failure to plan is what ultimately pushed his brother Prometheus to act in defiance of Zeus. He would not allow their creation to venture forth unarmed, and proceeded to travel amongst the workshops and homes of the other gods, stealing their skills and giving them to mankind, before his famous theft of fire. Before he was taken to the mountain and chained to his rock, he told Epimetheus directly not to accept anything from Zeus. No gifts, no offers, nothing. This was his warning because nothing from the gods comes without a cost. Epimetheus both heard and understood the warning his brother gave him. That should have been enough, but warnings don't always fail because they're unclear. Sometimes they fail because they're inconvenient. If you enjoy breaking stories down like this, please like the video and consider subscribing. Epimetheus hadn't angered Zeus like his brother, so he was left to live freely among the gods, untouched by punishment. But Zeus was still angry with mankind and wanted a way to answer that defiance. And this is where Epimetheus becomes part of it. Hephaestus crafts a woman from metal, and Zeus breathes life into her, shaping something that isn't just a creation, but a response. She's made to be impossible to refuse. Beautiful, curious, new. Everything that pulls someone in without resistance. And then Zeus offers her to Epimetheus as a wife. Not a threat, not a command, just an offer. And Epimetheus knows exactly what his brother told him. No gifts, no offers, nothing at all. He understands the warning. He knows where this is coming from. And still, he hesitates. Just for a moment. Not because he doesn't understand, but because saying no would mean turning away from something right in front of him. Something that feels real. Something that feels harmless. And that's usually how it starts. It's not some obvious mistake. It's a quiet justification. Maybe it's not the same this time. Maybe his brother was cautious. Maybe this isn't really a gift, just an opportunity. Maybe he's overthinking it. And that thought is enough to move him forward. Because the warning is distant, abstract, something tied to consequences that haven't happened yet. But this is immediate. This is something he can see, something he can have, something that doesn't feel dangerous until it already is. And so, he accepts. Not out of ignorance, not because he was tricked, but because in that moment, the thing in front of him felt easier to choose than the warning he already understood. And this is where it all unfolds. Because when Pandora is given to Epimetheus, she isn't sent alone. Zeus gives her a wedding gift, a jar, and tells her not to open it. That's the instruction. Simple. Direct. And like most warnings, it doesn't come with an explanation, just the expectation that it will be followed. But Pandora is curious. That's part of how she was made. And at some point, that curiosity wins. She opens it. And when she does, everything comes out. Pain, suffering, disease. Things that weren't part of the world before suddenly are. And it's easy to look at that moment and place everything on her, to say that this is where it all goes wrong. But the story doesn't really start there, because none of it happens without the decision before it. Epimetheus doesn't open the jar, but he allows it into his life. He lets it in, knowing where it came from, knowing what he was told. And that's what makes the consequences feel different, because it doesn't come from a single action. It comes from a choice that didn't feel big enough to carry that kind of weight. And this is where the story stops being about the jar, or Pandora, or even Zeus, and starts to point back at something more familiar. Because Epimetheus knew better. He wasn't confused. He wasn't missing information. He had already been told exactly what to do and still chose something else. And that's the part that makes this uncomfortable, because it's easy to blame curiosity or the way the situation was set up. But at the center of it is something simpler. He ignored a warning he understood. And that's not unique to him. That's something people do all the time. Not because they don't know, but because in the moment, the thing in front of them feels easier, or better, or more real than the consequence they've been told to avoid. That's where it starts to feel less like a myth and more like a pattern, because people do this all the time. Not in big, dramatic ways, but in small, quiet decisions that don't feel important in the moment. You know something isn't right. You've been warned, maybe even by your own experience, and still, you go along with it. Not because you don't understand, but because it's easier to deal with what's in front of you than what might come later. There's comfort in saying yes, in avoiding the tension of pushing back, in convincing yourself it'll probably be fine. And that's usually how it sounds in your head. It's not some clear, obvious mistake. It's quieter than that. It's telling yourself you're overthinking it, that it's not that serious, that this time will be different, that you'll handle it if it gets worse. And for a moment, that's enough to move forward. And it shows up in places that don't feel dramatic. Staying in something you already know isn't right. Ignoring a pattern you've seen more than once. Letting something slide because dealing with it now feels harder than dealing with it later. You recognize the signs, you've felt this before, and still, you give it a pass. Not because you're confused, but because stopping it would mean creating tension, making a decision, or giving something up that you don't want to let go of yet. So, you move forward anyway. And that's what makes it consistent. It's not a lack of information. It's not a lack of awareness. It's the decision to prioritize what feels easier in the moment over what you already know is coming. Because the consequence isn't real yet. It's distant. It's abstract. But the choice is right in front of you, and it feels manageable. It feels small. And that's usually how it starts. Not as something that feels heavy or final, but as something you convince yourself you can deal with later, even though you already know how it ends. And that's where it shows up now, just in ways that don't feel as obvious. It's not a God offering you something. It's situations you recognize, patterns you've already seen before, choices you've made enough times to know how they end. And still, you step into them again. You ignore the feeling that something's off. You push past the warning because the moment feels manageable, or familiar, or easier than dealing with it directly. And nothing about it feels dramatic when it's happening. It's just a decision that doesn't seem big enough to matter. And most of the time, it doesn't even feel like a decision. It feels like going along with something, letting it happen, not pushing back. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later, that it's not worth making a big deal out of right now. And that's usually the part that gets missed. It's not always about choosing the wrong thing, it's about not choosing at all. Letting something continue because stopping it would take more effort than you're willing to give in that moment. And you can usually feel it when it's happening, that small hesitation, that pause where something doesn't sit right. But it's easy to move past it, easy to ignore it, because acting on it would mean changing something, and change is always harder than letting something stay the same, even if you already know where it leads. And then later, when it plays out the way you expected, it feels obvious, like it couldn't have gone any other way. But at that moment, it didn't feel like that. It felt manageable. It felt like something you could manage if it got worse. And that's the part that keeps repeating, the gap between what you know and what you do, and how easy it is to close that gap in the wrong direction. That's really what stays with you about Epimetheus, not that he didn't know, but that he did, and still chose the easier path in front of him. It wasn't a dramatic failure, it wasn't some moment of confusion, it was just a decision that didn't feel big enough to matter at the time. And that's what makes it uncomfortable, because most people don't make their worst choices by accident. They make them knowing, just not wanting to deal with what comes with saying no. And that's the part that's easy to miss. It doesn't feel like a defining moment when it's happening. It feels small, manageable, like something you can adjust later if you need to. And most of the time, that's justification. That you'll handle it if it gets worse. That you're not locked in. That this isn't permanent. But that's usually how those decisions work. They don't feel permanent until they are. And by the time it's clear what it cost, it's already too late to go back and treat it like a warning again. It's already something you must deal with instead of avoiding. And maybe that's the point of the story. Not that people don't understand what they're being told, but that understanding isn't always enough to change what they choose. Because knowing something is one thing, acting on it is something else entirely. And that gap between what you know and what you do is where most of the damage happens.